Hello, welcome back to part 2 of our TTH Blueprint with Rashik Palmer, MBE. I hope you enjoyed the first half. Stick with it for the second half and a few punchlines in there. Keep listening. I hope you enjoy. Please comment and feedback. Do you see yourself now, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, do you see yourself as a broadcaster or a listener?
So I think I'm a bit of both, to be honest. And I think you need to be a bit of both. I think if you've got a message to give, then you need to find a way of giving that message. And I think a lot of people in the world have a message to give, but they don't know how to broadcast it. And they're trying to find their media. So funny enough, one of the ex-IBM colleagues, she's been trying to share some stories for some time. And she found out about our radio. We're going to collaborate on building a show with her. And it's finding that media which allows you to share your insights. But as the old phrase goes, you've got 2 ears and one mouth. You've got to use them in that proportion.
Yeah.
You do need to listen. If you don't listen, you're not going to be able to make a difference. And I think one of the big issues that we have in society today is because of this kind of social media-led, attention deficit-led world, people don't listen deeply enough. And so the influences are really almost brainwashing you to follow their particular point of view. And as a result, you get this mass hysteria moving down a particular pathway without necessarily thinking about, is that the right pathway to go down?
Yeah.
And I think that creates lots of polarization in society, creates lots of challenges in society, and how we try to get people that really listen to understand and think for themselves is a big issue today.
I mean, I think it's a massive issue. And as we've talked about a few times, part of the reason that I do this is I think it's trying to help people to find their voice. And that's the first piece. You have to encourage people, communities, people who don't often get the opportunity to express their voice, to find a voice. And then you have to find a way to encourage people to listen, because it's very, very easy for people to switch off. And one of my previous guests, Alan Young, aka Serious Child, we talked about, he's a musician, former consultant turned musician. And we talked about protest songs. And he said, the problem with protest songs is that the only people who listen to protest songs are the people who want to hear the protest message.
Yes.
But actually what you need is the metaphorical protest song to fall on the people who need to hear that thing. So he does a lot more community bottom-up type work, which I think is super important.
There's a great book I've just been reading from a lady called Emily Casriel. I was very fortunate to have worked with her in the past when she was at the BBC. And her book is on deep listening. So she's been doing work trying to help people on different sides of very complex situations come and talk to each other. So Christians talking to Muslims, or people on the Brexit for and against talking to each other in families. And that's, I think, a fascinating sort of set of societal issues. And what she's doing there is great. So if any of you listeners want to listen, go and check out what she's done. She's got some really good insights there.
That'd be great. Thank you for that. Okay, let's if we move on and talk about sustainability, which is a very broad topic, and in particular, I think this this concept of tech for good, which I like, because it turns it into a positive as opposed to turning it into a negative. And again, part of what I'm trying to do in the third half and previously in the tech ledger was to say, we've got all this AI stuff that's coming out. We've got people saying AI is going to fix a lot of problems, but AI is kind of creating problems as well. Yeah. And you touched on it in your introduction, which was, what happens, and my question would be, what happens when doing good means slowing down, costing more, or just saying no, and trying to balance that progress with principles? Quite a difficult thing to balance out there.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that we move fast and don't necessarily understand the consequences of what we're doing when we move fast. So for example, we'll pull a new chatbot out there which sits on top of 50 years worth of technology, we don't realize that little chatbot is going to drive huge amounts of energy consumption in the existing systems and going to create a huge amount of cost and challenge that they hadn't even thought about. But they just see this little nice new shiny thing on the front. So I think there is the need to think holistically about projects and programs is really important. And holistically, not just in terms of the function or the service you're trying to create, but also what sits below the iceberg, right? And we talked about the outages earlier. It's not just the outages. When we look at switching on the TV and starting to stream a particular piece of music or particular show, what's the impact of that? What's the real cost of that from a societal perspective? Is that better for society than say using something else like a CD? And has anybody already sat down and looked at it? And there's huge papers that have done this. I've read a lot of the papers, and digital technologies typically use less energy than their traditional product-based, physical-based things, right? So when you get virtual service, it's usually better. And I think we can use digital to help decarbonize daily life. There's a huge opportunity there. Lots of parts of what we do. Not needing to travel is goodness, because we can do this podcast here. I'm where I am, where you are. We didn't have to go and meet anywhere to do that. That will have saved quite a bit of carbon emissions in their own right. And yes, sure, we will create some more carbon emissions elsewhere, but it's a lot less than we would have done if we'd have gone to meet. In a similar way, do we need to have that many pictures of fluffy animals on our mobile devices? and
Yep.
and the digital waste that's out there. I did a piece of work with one of the organizations some years ago, and we looked at the digital footprint of storage. And they had a particular customer database, which is about 5 petabytes. And no kidding, they had 52 copies of that database. Wow. Because each developer wanted his own copy, right? And they wouldn't think, well, I just need it for now, so I'll use it now and then put it back in and close. No, I've got my copy and it's now my copy, right? And that 52, so 260 odd petabytes of data, which that was using a chunk of energy, was using a chunk of storage capacity, had a chunk of cost. Nobody had even batted an eyelid at the fact that that was there. Yeah. It was just part of doing the service. Right.
So how do we? This makes my head explode, because I wrote about this on LinkedIn, an article on LinkedIn probably about a year ago or something, and it was about decluttering. There's a big movement on TV shows. Oh, declutter your house and stuff like that. And what about your digital clutter? Mm-hmm. Which sounds like a lyric from a song by The Fall or something. That's just showing my music taste. But nobody listens. And I think part of the problem is that LinkedIn now is just for people trying to sell people stuff or people trying to find jobs. It's not the community that necessarily it was before. So how do we kind of make sure that these things are known and understood, which is the difficult thing? White papers are white papers, research. I sense we have to get the data right. We have to be able to report on these things. And I'm on the board of an ESG reporting startup, as you know, and that's one thing. But again, it's quite immature. How do we get the message out about simple things like digital declutter?
I think it's down to getting the influencers to help us with this, right? I think there's people out there who are trying to do that. And if you learn from the influencers, there's a well-defined set of processes that they use to go and get the attention. They do things which are, shock and awe, right? Yeah. That's what kicks this off. You've got to then create a movement around that, and then you've got to find a way of scaling your impact, which gets society to move. We saw that with David Attenborough with the bottles, right? Plastic bottles, and where plastics end up in society. I think you've got to shock people into realizing the impact of what you're doing here.
Yeah. Have you, and interestingly, because have you ever had to make a really difficult decision linked to your ethics and I feel as if you've evolved probably since you left large corporate, right?
Mm.
Because I think when we were in large corporate, you tend to get encouraged to march in a particular direction in a particular way. And now you're kind of free from those shackles of the large corporate shackles. And I'm not talking about any one supplier in particular, because I think corporate life's a little bit
Yeah.
like that. So are you making decisions in a different way now? And are you making tough decisions that you look back on and think, okay, was that the right decision or not to make?
So actually, I go back to a time when I was at IBM. There was a project that I got parachuted in to go look after, which where a team had gone in and advised a client on a particular solution,
Hmm.
and they had either intentionally or accidentally overlooked a key fact. So they'd been the client was under the impression that this system they'd bought was fault tolerant, and there was no single point of failure. The reality was there was a very clear single point of failure, and that failure point did happen. And the failure point was a piece of microcode. When that failure happened, it impacted all their systems, and all their systems were down. And I was asked to go and help recover that solution. And on the back of that, we created a set of guidelines for anybody building systems, saying these are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself. Have you been clear and upfront about all aspects of reliability, availability, serviceability, the whole operational aspect of this with the client? Because if you haven't and something fails, that's going to come back to us. And at the same time, I also advised the client and said, when you're buying things, you need to be able to ask these questions, because if you don't, it's going to, you're the ones in the firing line at the end of this.
Mm.
So I think sits on both sides of this. I've worked with a little bit with the Chartered Institute for Procurement and Supply, because again, the procurement organizations need help with this. A lot of the people who are buying technology solutions don't necessarily have the skills to know how to ask the right questions to get the right decisions made. And I think it's about helping people learn to ask the right questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for clarity for our listeners, that IBM project that you talked about was not something I was involved in.
No, absolutely
Yep, yep,
not.
yeah. Global disclaimer: Hamilton wasn't involved. Thank you for that. But it's quite interesting that I think having come from giants and you've helped some giants evolve. You were. When I think back to some of the stuff you were doing in IBM, everybody looked up to you and looked to you for leadership and guidance, and internally and client stuff as well. So you have helped giants like IBM and BCS evolve, which I think is super important. How do you stop legacy and legacy companies from becoming deadweight generally and turn them into more of a foundation for trust and sustainability? Because and again, I spent most of my life working for large corporates as well, and I know that there's a lot of positive sustainability messaging coming out. I'm not saying it's all greenwashing, but it's really difficult to turn some of these large institutions around. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is such a massive question. We need to you got to go back to understanding what are the mechanisms that drive society. And fundamentally, one of the biggest mechanisms that we have is money and the stock market. And today, the financial system is all about profit and generating more profit. Can we get off the profit engine, or is there a better way of measuring profit? Sarkozy did a great piece of work when he left his role and looked at the ways we measure nations. And do we need to redefine? Do we need to move away from GDP as our primary metric for progress? Do we need to have a different metric? And I think there are experiments that are being done in some of the smaller countries around the world to try and do something like that. But I think it needs to be led by a nation state. Right?
Mm,
You look at the happiness index, the happiest nations in the world, typically the Nordics, right?
mm,
Because they have that right balance. They have a very good social fabric. The governance structure works, and generally they have a level of happiness. Is that the right metric that we should measure our politicians on, right?
mm,
Or do we measure politicians on, how much they help us bring to the front all our fears of unemployment or of societal collapse, right? Because a lot of the election manifesto and manufacturing work is connected with all the problems in society, with very few solutions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so we've gone from community and community radio to
Mm.
sustainability to large corporate to geopolitics and world trade. Just to wind this up, let me bring you back to local community and local radio. Um, Desert Island Discs, or just Desert Island, Rashik Palmer. So you can have one gadget, one human value, and in line with the theme of the third half and the tech ledger before, one bit of cheese. Go.
One bit of cheese. Okay, so the bit of cheese is easy. I have blue cheese, right? Because it gives you a blend between different forms. In terms of which gadget I would have, I would probably go with a mobile phone of some sort.
Hmm.
Um, and the question is, what if there's no signal there?
We're down again. We're back
We're
to
down
outages.
again, exactly. But actually, as a device, it's incredibly useful because it's versatile, and even when it's off, you can still do quite a lot with it,
Yeah.
even when it's off, right? And in terms of one value, I think the value is to be human,
Hmm.
um, and actually to be a human rather than be a slave to somebody else. I think is a real value that you should focus on.
Perfect. I love that. And just for clarity, do you still have a drawer somewhere in your house that frustrates your wife because it's full of every mobile phone you've owned for the past 30 years?
It's called boxes. They're all around.
You actually looked it down there. I think if anybody is listening to this and not watching this, Rashik Palmer, you just looked it down. So
It's
there is
just here.
there is a box at your feet full of mobile phones. Rashik, thanks ever so much. It's an absolute pleasure listening to you, and I love what you're doing. Your story about the community and the radio station, and I've said this quite a few times. People talk about giving back, and it's such a common theme that they have, oh, I'm going to be portfolio, I'm going to be fractional, I'm going to give back. And you say, well, what do you mean? Oh, I don't know, I'm going to join some charity. Well, very few people actually manage to do it. I'm sleeping out this weekend for homeless people, and that's my little bit of give back. But I think what you're doing in the community is absolutely an amazing thing. But your story is fascinating. Every little part of the community and corporate life you touch is fantastic. So well done you, and it's just a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show. I know you're so busy.
No, thank you. It's been great to be here. And if anybody wants to connect, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can always listen to read my Sunday Sprinkles. I do a blog each week, so we can connect on that as well. So please do connect.
We'll be posting Sunday Sprinkles. We'll be sending out a link to your radio station. We'll maybe add a few countries or a few listeners, and you're going to get swamped with people on LinkedIn Connect with you now.
Brilliant.
Rashik,
Thanks,
enjoy
Scott.
the rest of your day.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.